Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known in this realm as Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you, join me once more and for the final time for this, I am even sad just mentioning it, the last entry of my The Road to the Dark Tower movie coverage here. A bit of coverage that has spanned 7 months now. I have gone month by month here in 2017 covering and rereading all of the Dark Tower books from The Gunslinger month by month throughout, including a few bonus entries which included The Wind Through the Keyhole and The Little Sisters of Eularia. Do you ken? Yes, I believe you do. If you are here for the 7th installment, I'm assuming that you have been with me every step of the way, or so I hope, and if you're discovering this late in the game, either after the film has come out on August 4th or, sometime down the line, thank you so very much. Gracias for joining me. I'm going to lay my dead and decrepit rose right here on the threshold before the 7th Dark Tower book, which is what I am here to discuss and have palaver with you about today, the 7th Dark Tower book. Now, I know that I have been critical, according to some people, of the final entries of the Dark Tower, and that is with good reason. I still, even with this reread, cannot say that I absolutely adore the way that this series ended, but with the second read, it really made a little bit more sense. And so, just to jump right into it, for the 6th installment, we basically had all of the preparation for this final and longest installment of the entire series. It's over 800 pages, it's massive, and it really packs a lot in. So when we left the 6th book, we basically had our team split into 2 factions, and then we had the third being Susanna, I should say, not to get confused with Miss Delgado, but Susanna/Mia, who was being taken from the Dixie Pig by Sayer and, all of his henchmen that included vampires, Tahin, which are like humans with animal heads and stuff, really crazy, and obviously Lowmen, which we learned about in Hearts in Atlantis, and that actually comes up here in this particular tale. But yeah, she is taken across through a doorway to Fedek, which is right beside, it's basically sandwiched in between Thunderclap and Discordia, the Castle Discordia, which is on its way to the Dark Tower. And so our heroes are in 1977, which is where we have Roland and Eddie basically trying to put together the Tech Corporation to fight against Sombra and North Central Positronics and do all that they can to protect the Rose in, the Keystone Earth, which is really our world as we like to think of it. And it's basically that Rose in that lot, which was going to be developed in the condos by North Central and Sombra, that has to be protected. And so, Eddie and, Roland are trying to get all of that together with, just various people, including, Calvin Tower and Ed Deepno and, so on. And then on the other side of things, in 99 of the Keystone Earth, we have Per Callahan, and we have Jake, who we didn't even really see until the very end of the 6th book, where they, show up and they're trying to get to the Dixie Pig and they're after Susanna. They find the turtle, the little, artifact, I guess, just a little sculpture thing that is as enchanting as the key that Jake had in book 3. And so that works to help their benefit of sorts, but our heroes are splintered. They eventually end up coming together in Thunderclap, and I should say basically where all of these breakers are, which we were introduced really to the breaker idea, if we're going to be technical, in Black House, which was the sequel to the Talisman. Find out what happened to Jack Sawyer after he's grown up, famous detective, comes back to a small town, trying to figure some shizzle out, and that's where we really got deep into what these children who are being taken, as we later on came to find out in Wolves of the Kala, what purpose they are serving. And so, our heroes eventually do end up getting back together, and then we have some very interesting characters from different books show up. We've got Ted Brodigan from Hearts in Atlantis. He shows up. Remember, he had those low men after him? If you guys have read that book, and if not, I highly recommend reading Hearts in Atlantis. We also have Dinky Earnshaw, who we saw in... Yeah, the story that this book basically gets its name for, Everything's Eventual. He is, he's got not so much the touch like Jake, he's almost got more like a push type of thing where he can make people do things, and so he's there as a breaker. Ted's there as a breaker. We also encounter one other Dark Tower character that, since I'm not trying to spoil things, if you like the earlier books like I do, especially the childhood of Mr. Deschain, yes, you will indeed enjoy the character who shows back up. And so, yeah, once we finally get back to Midworld and our peeps come back together, our quartet is reassembled proper, Oi and, you know, Jake and Eddie and Susanna and Roland, there is a very tall order that they have to figure out. And so I love the first like 2/3 of this book, I must say. I especially with the second read, I was nowhere near as critical of the stuff with Psy King and, you know, all of the meta stuff, which I really just, I don't know, it turned me off the first time I read it in book 6 and 7, but I tolerated it more here, and I think I was a little bit more perceptive and paid attention more, especially for the sheer fact that I was both reading and doing the audiobook, and so I was kind of jumping back and forth, and King really champions audiobooks constantly as far as the fact that you're less inclined to kind of just space out, you know, when you're like reading and skimming pages and stuff like that. Audiobooks really make you pay attention, and I had a lot more fulfillment in the first 2/3 of this book than I did the initial time that I read it. However, final third of this book is really, really boring. Really boring, and I still stand by that. Essentially, once we really make the trudge towards the tower, you know, once Roland is like, you know, past certain circumstances and difficulties, and we lose some characters in this, you know, and it's really sad, you know, and I'm not going to specify as to who, you know, whether it's minor, major, whatever, but there's some sad stuff, because you pretty much, you know, and connect with all of the characters, whether, you know, it's a Jake or an Eddie or a Shimi or Susanna or, you know, Ted, or, you know, even Dinky, man. I like that dude from Everything's Eventual. He's cool. And so they're not all going to make it. That's the one thing that I can at least say without spoiling too much. And so after we get past the main few conflicts and trying to avert certain things, and I'm not going to specify whether they're completely done away with or averted properly or not, but once we finally get to that last trudge, you know, where they're like months and months of trying to get to the tower and going through End World and stuff, it is so boring. Seriously, I just, there's a part of me that really wishes that they had almost cut this into another book, almost like they did with, you know, Song of Susanna, because of the fact that I feel like King could have notched off the stuff in the last like 200-ish pages or so, maybe beefed it up, turned it into a whole other book, because it does feel like a whole other journey. Although there's still cool stuff that happens, you know, when you get to the Crimson King's castle and End World and some of the people you encounter there, or creatures I should say, and there's some really horrific elements to this particular book, but nothing was redeemed for me in this final entry, especially in the last X amount of pages, you know, last few hundred pages, as I mentioned, until you really get to the very, very end of it. And so this is where I must admit that I want to do a spoilers review of the entire series, just kind of talking, okay, series spoilers, what did you like, what didn't you like? I know I touched upon that briefly at my Road to the Dark Tower movie panel that I did at the Phoenix Comic Convention, but I really feel like I need to sit down and just have a proper, like, 30 minutes to an hour just talking spoilers about the series in general. There's a fate for certain characters that I feel is a cop-out and unjustified and not very interesting and really just disappointing. And I'm really thinking back to a comment that I got from somebody when I put up the 6th installment of this review series, and I was very critical of the 6th book in that review, and I was like, okay, the fact that King got hit by a vehicle in 99, you know, June 19th, 1999. What do you think 19 pops up everywhere? And, you know, that particular viewer said, look, the accident was what spurred him to finally finish this, because the way he had been meandering around about Shizzle, he was never going to finish it. And you know what? There's actually a lot of truth and a lot of wisdom to that, because of the fact that who knows if, you know, even if I didn't like the way the book ended, at least until the very final line, and just everything that happens in Coda, because I'm sure you guys have heard, if you're big fans of King, and if you're watching a review about the 7th book of the Dark Tower, for God's sake, ahead of the movie coming out, you've probably done enough research to know that there is a very controversial ending here. There's basically 2 endings. So King has an epilogue, and it's hunky-dory, kind of, that silver lining that you would pretty much expect from Stephen King, and then there's a coda afterwards, and he essentially implores the viewer, or excuse me, the reader, he's like, you had your great ending, do you really want to come along with me? Do ya? Do ya? I'm warning you. And then he's like, well, if you gotta come, you gotta come. And so that, in turn, becomes the real ending, and the real ending, I thought, was utter brilliance, and basically, with the monotony and the boredom of the final few hundred pages, including basically hitting people over the head with the fact that, yeah, you probably should have read Insomnia before reading this book, you know, even if you've only been reading the Dark Tower books, because you're going to get so much more out of this if you've read Insomnia. I'm actually planning a a particular video where I'm going to go through all the different series entries that tie in with the Tower, that if you want to start it fresh and go from Dark Tower 1 all the way through 7.5 books, these are books that you really need to read, and that's not just The Stand and Salem's Lot and you know, things, and Eyes of the Dragon, for instance. I mean, I'm talking a short story called I'm talking, you know, From a Buick 8. I'm talking Insomnia, obviously. I'm talking Hearts in Atlantis. And so there's a lot of really interesting tie-in stuff, but once again, I'm not so big on the meta aspect of the fact that King put himself in this series, and it's creative and kind of cool, you know, the way that he did it, but in the same right, I still have mixed feelings about it, even after this second read. So there you have it, guys. The Dark Tower, I'm sad that the series is over, at least for now. I'm still closely, you know, crossing my fingers that eventually Sai King will decide to do another entry that's like maybe I don't know, a 1.5 or something like that, or maybe a 3 whatever. Basically, give us Jericho Hill properly, not just in the comic books. The Fall of Gilead properly, not just in the comic books. The fact that he had Firth and Peter David and, you know, Jai Lee, they did a fantastic job with those comic books right there. I cannot recommend them enough. I actually just ordered the Gunslinger big hardbound collection, which you see right there, which is him adapting and kind of filling in the blanks, you know, through Marvel for, you know, the first book and everything that kind of happened around it. But as a whole, I still stand by my proclamation that 3 and 4 are my favorites in this entire series. I don't dislike 6 and 7 as much as I did when I initially read them, and you guys have already seen my retro reaction that I already put up on the channel before this video came up tonight. So basically 2 years ago, when I first finished the Dark Tower and I was like on that coda and I was right about to walk up and read those final like 20 pages or so, I expressed all my feelings then, and I urge you to watch that pretty much rapid reaction video that was originally on Fuegotainment, and I decided to share it as a horror show video since that channel has grown exponentially in comparison. And so yeah, I must admit, it's, as a final entry, it's beautiful, it's sad, but yet it's bloated, and it really could have done with either some trimming or chopping the back half into a separate book. And yeah, that is going to do it for this final entry of The Road to the Dark Tower movie. Got to give a shout out to Bev Vincent, obviously. Check out his book, The Road to the Dark Tower. That's where I drew inspiration to actually do this video series here on the horror show. The man is brilliant and pretty much a historian of the King that I aspire to even come close to. Shout out to Richard Chismar and Cemetery Dance for all the amazing stuff that they do, obviously. They didn't have much of a hand in the Dark Tower, but you see all of their stuff here in the background. Grant Books, Simon & Schuster, you know, there is there's a lot of different publishers and people that come together to really make sure that, you know, as I call him, El Rey, the king, really is able to just realize his vision. And so I look forward to discussing the film with you guys on August 4th, but there's going to be a couple bonus entries probably about tie-in books and also, you know, the comics as well, and you know, just a few little fun things, maybe even a Dark Tower movie preview where I finally talk about my thoughts on some of the casting and some of the changes, and, you know, the fact that the Horneveld is with you know, Mr. Idris Elba, who is playing the gunslinger in this, you know, final entry, and, you know, also the fact that it's a 95-minute movie. Man, it's pretty quick. So hopefully we're going to get more entries. They're still saying there's going to be a television series that accompanies it, harkening back to Ron Howard's initial vision 10 years ago. So I gotta extend a grande gracias to all of the peeps here, because that's where the journey ends, my friends and constant readers. I do hope that we have been well met. I've been Jaime and Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, at Jaime and Fuego. Make sure to follow all things Sai King. As I mentioned, he's at Stephen King on Twitter, and he's, you know, on every social media sector and in every bookstore on the planet that you can think of. Make sure to check out the Dark Tower book series, the comic book series. I'm actually gonna maybe be doing something about the video game called Discordia, which is on computer, and I think it's on Stephen King's .com website, and it basically follows the further just I guess, you know, intermingling of the Tech Corporation going against Sombra and North Central. And yeah, I look forward to discussing this series once the film comes out and all the excitement that is going to be surrounding that. So once again, amigos, gracias. Thank you so very much. Thankee Sai. And until the Wheel of Ka comes around again once more, hasta luego, sin amigos. I hope that it is sooner rather than later. And until that instance comes about, stay scared and read Stephen King's The Dark Tower. I was really disappointed in the way they treated some stuff at the end.